Do you think a night of bowling is all fun and laughter? Think again. Behind the clatter of pins and the neon glow of your favorite alley lies a chilling truth. Stories that are as real as the shadows that linger after midnight. Welcome to 5 Scary True Bowling Horror Stories, where every strike hides a sinister secret, and every split might just split your soul in two. Imagine this. You step up to the lane, heart pounding with excitement, only to find that the ball you roll awakens a curse. Picture the terror of hearing your own laughter echoing in empty corridors, or catching a glimpse of a reflection that isn't yours. Only a phantom version, twisted with despair. These aren't just tales made up to spook you. They're true accounts that have left players haunted for life. In tonight's video, we peel back the veneer of an innocent game to reveal 5 bone-chilling stories. Stories that have made bowling alleys the stage for inexplicable phenomena, ghostly apparitions, and dark curses that defy logic. If you ever felt a shiver run down your spine while waiting for your turn, or sensed an eerie presence in the silence after the final pin falls, you're not alone. The truth is out there, and it's more terrifying than you ever imagined. So, if you dare to journey with us into the heart of darkness hidden within these alleys, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Turn on notifications and get ready to uncover the secrets that will make you think twice the next time you hear the rumble of a bowling ball. Trust us. Once you know these stories, you'll never look at a bowling lane the same way again. Stay tuned. And remember, sometimes the game isn't over until the nightmare ends. The old Pinewood Lanes had always been a relic of a bygone era. Its cracked floors, chipped paint, and dim flickering neon lights told stories of countless games and forgotten nights. Nestled in the heart of a quiet town, the bowling alley was once a cherished haven for local families and friends. But over the years, as newer, flashier centers took over, Pinewood Lanes began to crumble, not just in structure, but in reputation. Whispers of strange happenings began to swirl, particularly about one fateful night when the strikes started coming on their own. It all began on an ordinary evening. A group of 4 longtime friends, Sam, Lisa, Marcus, and Jenna, decided to relive their youth and meet at Pinewood Lanes for a casual game. The night air was cool, and the town lay in a hushed state as if it, too, was holding its breath. They were a tight-knit crew, bound by shared memories of youthful mischief and laughter. That night, they were determined to recapture that sense of camaraderie, even if just for a few hours. As they took their seats in the cramped seating area, the echoes of past strikes and gutter balls seemed to linger in the air. The conversation was light, punctuated with jokes about old scores and missed shots. They started playing, their laughter filling the gaps between the soft hum of the aging machines and the occasional creak of the building settling into the cool night. At first, the game was just as they remembered it. Sam, the self-appointed leader of the group, went first. He rolled his ball down the lane with a practiced swing, sending it gliding smoothly across the polished wood. To everyone's delight, it knocked down all 10 pins, a perfect strike. But just as the pins fell, a chill wind whispered through the alley, and for a split second, a dark shadow skittered across the lane. The friends exchanged puzzled glances, chalking it up to their imaginations, or perhaps a draft from an old vent. "Strange," Marcus murmured, his eyes narrowing as he looked down the lane. Lisa shrugged, smiling nervously. "Maybe the old building is just settling. Let's not read too much into it." They continued playing, the initial unease slowly melting back into the comfort of old habits and shared laughter. Yet, with every strike that followed, the pattern repeated itself. A flash of darkness sliding along the lane, disappearing almost as quickly as it had come. With each occurrence, the joyous atmosphere gave way to a creeping sense of dread. It was as if the alley was silently warning them that something was not right. Jenna, who had always been the most sensitive of the group, was the first to break the silence. "Guys, do you see that?" she asked in a hushed tone. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the lane as another shadow raced by, darker and more defined than the ones before. The game halted as all 4 of them stared, frozen by a growing realization. They were not alone in the alley. The conversation turned from playful banter to nervous speculation. Local legends had long spoken of a ghost, a young bowler who had vanished from Pinewood Lanes years ago under mysterious circumstances. According to the stories passed down through generations, his spirit roamed the lanes, doomed to seek the perfect game he never achieved in life. His presence was said to be heralded by inexplicable strikes and shadows that danced in the periphery of one's vision. What if it's true? Sam asked, trying to sound both logical and dismissive. Yet his voice trembled with uncertainty. Marcus leaned in, his eyes scanning the dim light. Maybe his spirit isn't finished with the game. Maybe he's trying to finish what he started. Lisa tried to muster a smile, but it wavered. We're just superstitious. It's a rundown old building after all. These things happen, glitches in the power, drafts, nothing more. Despite her reassurances, the air around them grew colder with each roll of the ball. As the game progressed, the strikes began to multiply at an alarming rate. Every time a perfect strike occurred, the mysterious shadow appeared, a fleeting silhouette that seemed to mirror the movement of the ball. The lights above the lanes flickered erratically, plunging them into brief moments of near-total darkness before returning to their weak glow. By the time Jenna's turn came around, an oppressive silence had fallen over the group. The once comforting hum of the bowling machines now sounded like distant, mournful whispers. With a deep breath, Jenna rolled her ball, watching it glide with an eerie smoothness toward the pins. As it struck, the room was bathed in an icy gust that extinguished a few bulbs, and in that moment, the shadow wasn't just a glimpse. It lingered, stretching unnaturally along the lane before dissolving into the darkness. The chill that followed was more than just physical. It seeped into their souls, a palpable reminder that something was amiss. Sam's confident demeanor cracked, revealing the raw edge of fear beneath. "I don't like this," he confessed, his voice low and strained. "It's like we're being played with." Lisa's eyes met his, filled with worry. "I've heard the stories. They say the ghost of a young bowler haunts this place, desperate to complete his final perfect game. Maybe we're disturbing him." Marcus shook his head. "No, that's just legend. But damn, it feels real tonight." The game continued, each strike intensifying the mystery. With every perfect score, the shadow grew more pronounced, and the air grew colder, as if the spirit was drawing energy from the fear it created. By the time they reached the final round, the friends found themselves sitting in a state of disbelief and terror, their earlier joviality completely eroded by the supernatural occurrences. Sam, usually the bravest, now sat hunched over, his eyes darting nervously around the alley. "We should stop, guys. This isn't just some random anomaly. It feels deliberate." But before they could decide to call it a night, the final frame began. In a moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, the ball was rolled one last time down the lane. The friends held their breath, the silence around them thick and heavy with anticipation. As the ball met the pins, a brilliant flash of light exploded, followed by a sudden, bone-chilling gust that extinguished nearly all the bulbs in the alley. In that instant, the shadow materialized in full, a tall, indistinct figure clad in a faded bowling uniform, its eyes hollow and its presence exuding a sorrowful intensity. It moved with an eerie grace, drifting over the lane as the score on the digital display jumped to an impossible perfect score. The ghost's gaze swept over the terrified players, and in that moment, each one felt as though they were being judged, as if their very souls were laid bare before a spectral jury. A deep, mournful sound, like a sigh carrying centuries of regret, filled the room. The shadow's form seemed to waver, caught between the realms of the living and the dead. In the silence that followed, a single whisper resonated through the hall. "Finish my game." The words echoed, bouncing off the walls and penetrating the hearts of those present. It was as if the spirit's plea had been heard, an eternal desire for redemption, for the final strike that had eluded him in life. The friends, paralyzed by fear and empathy, felt the weight of his sorrow, the endless cycle of his haunting. For a long, excruciating minute, nothing happened. Then, as if compelled by a force beyond their control, Sam slowly reached for the ball, his hands trembling violently. "We have to help him," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Lisa and Marcus exchanged uncertain glances, while Jenna remained silent, her eyes fixed on the spectral figure. Sam positioned himself at the lane, his mind a whirlwind of terror and reluctant determination. With shaking resolve, he rolled the ball once more. The sphere glided down the lane, its movement eerily fluid, as if guided by an invisible hand. The moment the ball hit the pins, the entire alley seemed to tremble. The shadow, caught in a state of desperate hope and anguish, reached out with a spectral hand, its form quivering as if about to vanish. But then something unexpected happened. As the pins fell, the alley lights flickered back to life, bathing the lane in a cold blue glow. The ghost's form flickered, its face contorted in a mixture of relief and pain. For that split second, the spirit's eyes met Sam's, and in them, a silent plea was unmistakable, a call for closure, for a final release from an endless torment. The digital scoreboard blinked, the numbers resetting to 0 as if marking the end of a chapter. The ghost began to fade, the oppressive chill lifting slightly, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of melancholy and regret. The friends sat in stunned silence, the gravity of what they had witnessed sinking in. Pinewood Lanes, with its faded glory and crumbling facade, had been the stage for an age-old tragedy. A story of a young bowler whose life had ended in mystery, his spirit trapped in an eternal quest for perfection. After that night, nothing in Pinewood Lanes was the same. The legend of the ghost spread like wildfire, its tale recounted in hushed tones by locals and visitors alike. The alley, once a hub of casual fun, became a place of eerie reverence and fear. People whispered that on certain nights, when the wind howled just right, you could still hear the sound of bowling balls rolling and the distant, sorrowful call of a spirit longing to finish his game. Years later, when the old building finally closed its doors for good, some brave souls claimed they saw a lone figure at the entrance. A young man in a tattered bowling uniform, watching silently as the darkness reclaimed his once beloved alley. And whenever anyone mentioned the name Pinewood Lanes, the story of the strike of shadows was retold. A chilling reminder that some games never truly end, and that sometimes the score is more than just numbers on a screen. It is a curse, a lingering echo of a life unfinished, waiting in the shadows for someone to complete the final, perfect strike. For those who still pass by the deserted alley, the lesson remains clear. Some spirits are bound by their own regrets, and when you hear the whispers of the past, it may be best to listen from a distance, lest you find yourself drawn into a game that you can never win. They called it the last frame, because once you set foot in that particular lane, you were never the same again. In the small town of Maple Hollow, tucked between dense woods and fog-shrouded hills, the old Stony Brook Bowling Center stood as a relic of another era. Its faded neon signs, vintage lanes, and creaking floors spoke of better days. But behind its nostalgic charm lurked a secret, a curse that had turned fun nights into a harbinger of doom. It was a chilly autumn evening when a group of 5 friends decided to relive their youth and test their luck at Stony Brook. There was Eric, the quiet observer with eyes that seemed to hold countless stories. Melissa, whose brave smile often masked hidden fears. Danny, ever the joker, unafraid of ghost stories. Karen, pragmatic and grounded. And finally, Sam, a believer in the supernatural whose passion for the paranormal made him the de facto storyteller of their group. They had heard the whispers about the last frame lane, but curiosity and youthful bravado had won over caution. The group gathered at the center's entrance just as the twilight deepened into a cold night. The building's exterior was worn but dignified, a testament to a time when life moved slower and every creak of the floorboards carried a tale. They paid the modest entrance fee and stepped inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with memories. Faded photographs of smiling patrons, long-forgotten trophies, and vintage bowling balls lined the walls. The lanes stretched out like silent promises of a night filled with laughter and friendly competition. They chose lane number 7, a lane whispered about in hushed tones by regulars. It was said that those who played on this lane would feel an inexplicable shift, a subtle pull that would change them forever. As they laced up their worn sneakers and grabbed their bowling balls, an uneasy chill ran through them. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed intermittently, casting long, quivering shadows that danced along the polished wooden floors. With casual banter and nervous laughter, the friends began their game. The first few frames were ordinary, filled with the clatter of pins, playful teasing, and the simple joy of competing. Danny's booming laugh filled the space as he celebrated a good throw, and Karen's confident strikes punctuated the game with her unwavering precision. But as the game neared its end, an oppressive atmosphere began to settle over Lane 7. It was during the 10th frame that everything changed. The friends gathered around as Eric prepared to roll his ball, his face illuminated by the intermittent glow of the overhead lights. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating silence replacing the earlier joviality. Eric's hand trembled slightly as he placed the ball at the start of the lane. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then, with an unexpected force, Eric launched the ball. It glided down the lane with an eerie grace, curving in ways that defied the laws of physics. It wasn't a straight roll, nor was it the familiar, predictable path of a well-thrown ball. Instead, it meandered and twisted as if it were being guided by an unseen hand. The sound of the ball echoing down the lane was muffled by a deep, almost imperceptible hum that resonated in the dark corners of the alley. As the ball reached the pins, the silence shattered. The impact was not the cheerful crash of bowling pins, but a cacophony of sounds, a chorus of long-forgotten screams, echoing as if from a distant past. The pins scattered in all directions, one pin after another falling with a hollow thud. In the midst of that chaos, something impossible happened. A single, perfectly placed bowling pin remained standing. It glowed faintly, illuminated by an otherworldly light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The group froze. Danny's laughter died on his lips, and Karen's confident eyes widened in disbelief. Melissa's voice quivered as she whispered, "Did you see that?" Even Sam, the believer in the paranormal, was rendered speechless, his face a mask of terror and awe. Before anyone could react further, a soft, mocking laugh echoed through the empty lanes, a laugh that was both familiar and disturbingly otherworldly. It sent shivers down their spines and stirred a deep, primitive fear within them. The sound was like a whisper in a long-forgotten language, as if the very walls of the bowling center were speaking in riddles. Eric stepped back from the lane, his mind racing. "That wasn't just a strike," he stammered. It was something else." Melissa's eyes darted around the dimly lit center. "I've heard the legend," she said quietly. "They say that Lane 7 steals a piece of your soul with every roll, that it leaves you forever changed. They call it the last frame, because when you play here, you never get a final frame that's truly yours." Karen frowned, her analytical mind trying to piece together the inexplicable events. "That's just a story, isn't it? A way to scare kids. There's got to be a logical explanation." But as the group began to process what they had witnessed, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost suffocating. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the intermittent buzzing of the lights turned into a constant, eerie hum that vibrated in the very bones of the building. Shadows lengthened and deepened, merging with the darkness in a way that made them feel as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. Determined to shake off the creeping dread, the friends decided to call it a night. They gathered their things, leaving behind the cursed lane and its haunting secret. Yet as they walked out, the lingering echo of that spectral laugh and the sight of that solitary, glowing pin haunted their every step. Over the next few days, the friends found themselves unable to shake the memory of that night. Eric, who had been the first to throw the ball in the final frame, began experiencing unsettling visions. Fleeting images of a smiling face in a vintage bowling uniform, eyes glinting with mischief and malice. Melissa would wake up in the middle of the night, the sound of distant laughter echoing in her ears, as if the alley had followed her home. Danny's once carefree demeanor was replaced by an unspoken terror, and Karen, ever the skeptic, found herself researching the history of Stony Brook Bowling Center late into the night. What she uncovered sent a chill down her spine. Decades ago, a young man had been a regular at Stony Brook, a prodigy of the lanes whose passion for bowling was matched only by his enigmatic charm. One fateful night, after a particularly brilliant game, he vanished without a trace. His disappearance was shrouded in mystery, the last thing recorded on the scorecard being a final, perfect frame that no one could replicate. The legend grew, and soon whispers spread that his spirit lingered in Lane 7, seeking to complete a final, perfect game. Unable to ignore the mounting evidence, the friends reconvened at Melissa's apartment one stormy night to discuss what they had learned. Rain battered the windows, the wind howling like the tormented cries of lost souls. In the dim light of a single lamp, they pored over old newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and faded photographs. The pieces of the puzzle began to form a horrifying picture. Every disappearance, every unexplained occurrence at Stony Brook had a common thread, a final frame, a perfect strike, and the ghost of the vanished bowler, whose soul was tethered to that cursed lane. "We need to go back," Sam insisted, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to finish his game. If we ignore it, who knows what might happen next time?" Despite the overwhelming dread that clutched at their hearts, the friends knew they couldn't leave the mystery unsolved. With reluctant resolve, they agreed to return to Stony Brook Bowling Center, this time with a plan to confront the curse head-on. The next visit was shrouded in foreboding. The building looked even more dilapidated than before, its windows dark and its facade covered in creeping ivy. Inside, the familiar sound of creaking floors and buzzing lights greeted them, but the atmosphere was unmistakably different, thicker, as if saturated with the weight of untold sorrows. They made their way to Lane 7, the cursed lane that had forever altered their lives. The air was colder, and the oppressive hum of the lights grew louder, almost deafening in its insistence. The friends gathered around, each silently steeling themselves for what was to come. Sam stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the lone, perfectly placed bowling pin that had been left behind the previous night. "We're here to help you," he said softly, addressing the unseen presence that seemed to permeate the space. "We're here to let you finish your game." With that, he picked up a bowling ball, its surface cold and unyielding in his hands. The group formed a tight circle around the lane, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Sam positioned himself at the start of the lane, just as Eric had done before. The tension was almost unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, with deliberate precision, Sam rolled the ball. It moved down the lane with a fluid, almost hypnotic grace, curving and twisting in ways that defied explanation. The sound of its journey was a low, rhythmic hum that merged with the pulsing of the overhead lights. The ball's path was as if it were following an invisible script, every motion predetermined by some ancient, unseen force. As the ball neared the pins, the oppressive silence was shattered once again by a symphony of voices, a chorus of whispers and distant screams that resonated through the very walls of the alley. The ball struck the pins, and in the ensuing chaos, the solitary pin remained untouched, glowing with that same eerie light. Then, in the midst of the clamor, a soft voice emerged, barely audible over the cacophony of spectral sounds. "Thank you," it whispered, a tone laden with sorrow and relief. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a haunting silence that fell over the group like a shroud. In that moment, something miraculous happened. The oppressive atmosphere began to lift, the heavy weight of despair receding like the tide. The spectral glow of the lone pin dimmed, and the oppressive hum of the lights softened into a gentle buzz. The friends exchanged glances, a mix of wonder and terror in their eyes. Had they truly succeeded in freeing the lost soul that had haunted Lane 7 for decades? Yet, as the silence deepened, a final, chilling realization gripped them. The scorecard on the wall, long dormant and dust-covered, flickered to life. In glowing, jagged digits, it recorded one final frame, a perfect game that had just been completed. But as the numbers settled into place, a new line of text appeared below. One soul claimed. Before any of them could react, the lights flickered violently one last time, plunging the lane into darkness. In that brief, disorienting moment, a solitary whisper, mocking yet mournful, drifted through the air. The game is never truly over. When the lights returned, the friends stood frozen, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just transpired. They left Stoneybrook that night with heavy hearts and haunted eyes, each burdened by the knowledge that they had not only witnessed a spectral phenomenon, but had also become irrevocably entwined with a curse that reached far beyond a simple game of bowling. In the days that followed, each of them felt a lingering change deep within their souls. Eric found himself unable to sleep, haunted by the memory of that final frame and the echo of those long-forgotten screams. Melissa became withdrawn, her once bright laughter now a rare sound, as if the joy had been siphoned away by some unseen force. Danny, whose humor had always been his shield, struggled to find solace in laughter, burdened by the ghostly whisper that seemed to follow him everywhere. Karen, the skeptic, spent long nights researching and piecing together the tragic history of Stoneybrook, her mind forever marked by the horrors of that cursed lane. And Sam carried the weight of the decision they had made, a silent burden that reminded him that sometimes helping a lost soul comes at a price. The legend of the last frame spread through Maple Hollow like wildfire, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones by those who dared to remember. Locals spoke of the cursed lane with reverence and fear, warning anyone who would listen that a game played on Lane 7 was a game where your soul might just be the final prize. Even today, on cold, stormy nights when the wind howls through the streets and the neon signs flicker uncertainly, there are those who claim to see a solitary bowling pin glowing faintly by itself in the shadows of Stoneybrook Bowling Center. And if you listen closely, you might still hear that distant, haunting laugh, a reminder that the game never truly ends, and that in the final frame, something precious may be forever lost. For those who hear the tale of the last frame, remember this. Some games are not meant to be played, for the price of winning may be far greater than you can ever imagine. Step away from Lane 7, walk away from the echoes of forgotten screams, and let sleeping spirits rest in peace, lest you find yourself forever bound to a final, cursed game. Hidden behind neon signs and the hum of city lights, there lay an abandoned bowling alley that few ever spoke of and even fewer ever found. It wasn't on any map, and those who stumbled upon it did so purely by accident. A misstep into a forgotten pocket of the city where modernity met decay. Locals called it the Alley of the Damned, a fitting name for a place built over a cursed burial ground, where the dead were said to whisper their long-held grudges into the ears of the unwary. On a stormy night, when rain lashed the pavement and thunder roared as if in anger, a lone wanderer named Alex found himself drawn to the eerie glow of an out-of-place neon sign. Alex was a curious soul, a drifter with a taste for urban legends and ghost stories. He'd spent countless nights in smoky bars and dimly lit diners, listening to tales of haunted places and cursed objects. That night, however, his curiosity led him to the edge of the city, where the familiar buzz of neon lights gave way to something far more sinister. Alex hadn't planned to stop by an abandoned bowling alley. He was seeking shelter from the relentless storm when he noticed a narrow, graffiti-laced alleyway veering off the main road. In its depths, a flicker of light beckoned him closer, a feeble promise of refuge. With a shiver that had little to do with the chill in the air, he stepped through a rusted door marked with peeling paint that simply read Starlight Lanes. The sign hung crookedly, as if burdened by a secret too heavy to carry. Inside, the building was a mausoleum of forgotten dreams. Dust motes danced in the beams of his weak flashlight as Alex's footsteps echoed against cracked tiles. The air smelled of dampness and decay, a scent that mingled with the faint odor of old grease and spilled soda. The lanes, once vibrant with the laughter of families and the clatter of pins, now lay silent and forlorn. Yet it was not the silence that unsettled him most, but the sight of the slick, dark substance that coated the lanes like spilled ink. It wasn't water. This was something else, something that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Alex's heart thumped in his chest as he stepped cautiously onto lane number 3, a lane that felt different from the others. It was as if an invisible barrier separated it from the rest of the decaying building. Ignoring the nagging voice in his head urging him to leave, he decided to play a game, if only to distract himself from the oppressive gloom. He picked up a dusty bowling ball from a rack that had long been abandoned and headed toward the foul-smelling, mysterious lane. The first roll was tentative, almost reverent. As Alex released the ball, it moved with an unsettling grace, rolling down the lane with a precision that belied his novice skill. But something was off. The ball's path wasn't straight. It curved unnaturally, as if compelled by an unseen hand. Alex's eyes followed the ball's crooked journey until it collided with the pins. The sound of impact was harsh, jarring. A cacophony that mingled with a chorus of anguished cries echoing from somewhere deep within the building. He paused, heart pounding, and glanced around. For a moment, the dim lighting revealed ghostly figures lurking in the corners of his vision. They seemed to be watching, their eyes filled with sorrow and malice, silently accusing him of trespassing on hallowed ground. Alex's skin crawled as the spectral shapes flickered in and out of existence. He tried to shake off the chill that crept over him, attributing the phenomenon to a trick of the light and his own overactive imagination. Determined not to be frightened by mere shadows, Alex prepared for another roll. This time, his hand was steady, but his mind raced with a mix of terror and wonder. As the ball left his grasp, it followed the same erratic path as before, but with each roll, the eerie chorus grew louder. The dark substance on the lane seemed to writhe beneath the ball, as if the ground itself was alive with the memories of the dead. With every pin it struck, the sound of crashing intermingled with mournful whispers and distant, spectral screams. Alex could feel an oppressive force gathering around him, a malevolent presence that made the air thick and hard to breathe. The sensation was like a weight on his chest, a suffocating reminder that this place was no ordinary relic of the past. It was as if the very soul of the building, corrupted by centuries of sorrow and anger, was reaching out to reclaim a piece of his own life. As the game continued, the spectral apparitions became bolder. Faces appeared in the dim reflection of the slick lanes, their expressions twisted in torment. One face, in particular, caught his eye, a gaunt, hollow visage with eyes that burned like dying coals, fixed on him with a gaze that seemed to pierce his very being. Alex's pulse thundered in his ears as he staggered back, the bowling ball slipping from his numb fingers and rolling into a dark corner where it vanished from sight. For a moment, silence enveloped the lane. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow every sound of the storm outside. Then, as if in response to his terror, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the alley. It was a sound that resonated with ancient malice, echoing off the walls like the death rattle of a long-forgotten spirit. The laugh was accompanied by a sudden gust of icy wind that extinguished the feeble light from his flashlight, plunging him into darkness. Alex fumbled desperately for his phone, its screen illuminating the immediate area with a cold, blue glow. As he turned the light back on, the spectral images had vanished, but the oppressive feeling remained. The lane, slick with its mysterious dark substance, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The chill in the air deepened, and the echoes of anguished cries returned, now louder and more desperate. With trembling hands, Alex gathered the courage to retrieve the bowling ball. The sound of his footsteps was drowned out by the storm outside, yet within the bowels of the alley, it was as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Each step he took was accompanied by an unspoken prayer that he might somehow escape the malevolent grasp of the damned souls that haunted this place. He made his way toward the exit, but found the path blocked by a series of spectral apparitions. They materialized before him, their ghostly forms drifting between the beams of his phone's light. Their eyes, empty yet accusing, bore into his soul. Alex's throat tightened as he realized that these were not mere illusions. They were the restless dead, drawn to the living with a hunger that defied explanation. The ghostly figures reached out with translucent hands, their touch cold and unnerving. Alex's body convulsed in terror as he tried to step around them, But every direction he turned, the spirits closed in tighter, like a noose slowly tightening around his neck. The anguished cries rose into a deafening wail, each note a dirge of unfulfilled sorrow and unavenged wrongs. Desperation lent Alex a burst of adrenaline. He dashed down the lane, his footsteps splashing against the slick surface as the unseen force seemed to chase him. The bowling alley transformed into a labyrinth of terror, a maze where every turn led to deeper darkness and every shadow concealed a lurking horror. The walls, once a comforting reminder of human endeavor, now bore scratch marks and ghostly handprints that told a story of violent, unending despair. At one point, Alex nearly tripped over something that lay in his path. He bent down to see a single, perfectly preserved bowling pin, its surface gleaming unnaturally in the intermittent light. It sat there like a monument, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded in this cursed place. For a fleeting moment, Alex wondered if the pin was a talisman, a sign that perhaps not all was lost, that there might be a way to break the curse. But as quickly as the thought came, it was replaced by a crushing certainty that he was in the grip of something far beyond his control. The spectral forces converged, their forms becoming indistinguishable from the darkness around him. Alex's mind reeled with terror, and his heart pounded so fiercely he feared it might shatter. In a final act of defiance, he bolted toward what he hoped was the exit. His body moved on sheer instinct, each step a desperate plea for survival as the ghosts closed in, their cries melding with the howling wind and the relentless pounding of rain on the decaying roof. Just as Alex reached the heavy, rusted door that promised escape, a cold, skeletal hand brushed against his shoulder. Time seemed to stop. In that agonizing moment, he turned slowly to face his tormentor. The figure that loomed before him was gaunt and cloaked in darkness, a visage that seemed to embody all the anguish and fury of the cursed burial ground beneath the alley. Its eyes, dark and endless, locked onto his with an intensity that burned with ancient rage. "You should not have come here," the specter whispered, its voice a blend of sorrow and malevolence that sent shivers down Alex's spine. "The dead have their own domain, and here, we reclaim what was once ours." The words echoed in Alex's mind, a prophecy of doom that resonated with the very walls of the forsaken bowling alley. In that final moment, as the spectral hand gripped him tightly, Alex realized that the curse of this place was far more than a mere urban legend. It was a living, breathing nightmare that consumed the souls of those who dared disturb its rest. With one last surge of desperate strength, Alex tore himself free from the ghostly grasp and flung open the heavy door. The storm outside welcomed him like a furious beast, its wind and rain a chaotic counterpoint to the order of the spectral realm he had just escaped. He stumbled into the night, the door slamming shut behind him with a final, echoing clang that seemed to seal the fate of Starlight Lanes. Later, as the storm subsided and the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Alex found himself huddled on a park bench, soaked to the bone and trembling with shock. He couldn't speak of what he had witnessed, a terror so profound that even the thought of it made his skin crawl. In the days that followed, the memories of that night haunted him relentlessly. The dark substance, the ghostly apparitions, and the anguished cries would replay in his mind at every quiet moment, a never-ending reminder of the cursed domain he had inadvertently entered. Alex eventually left the city, seeking solace in a life far removed from the shadows of that accursed alley. Yet, no matter how far he ran, he could never quite escape the memory of Starlight Lanes. Friends and acquaintances would notice the haunted look in his eyes, the way he flinched at the sound of creaking floors or the faintest whisper of wind. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the world was silent and the memories too loud, he would awake to the sound of distant, anguished cries, a spectral reminder that some curses, once awakened, never truly die. Even now, if you wander the backstreets of a city and find yourself drawn to a flickering neon sign in a forgotten alley, take heed of the stories whispered by those who remember. The Alley of the Damned stands as a monument to the restless dead, a place where the boundaries between life and death blur, and where every roll of a bowling ball may stir ancient spirits long buried under the weight of sorrow and regret. And should you ever feel that inexplicable chill, that haunting presence watching from the shadows, remember, some doors once opened can never be closed. For in the abandoned lanes of Starlight Lanes, the dead are not at rest. They are waiting, always waiting, to reclaim another soul for their eternal, cursed domain. At exactly midnight, the neon lights of Luna Lanes, a modern, bustling bowling alley known for its vibrant colors and late-night revelry, flickered and dimmed as if they were tired souls reluctant to perform. The hum of laughter, clattering pins, and the echoing thud of rolling balls was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling change in the atmosphere. It was as if the night itself had taken a deep, ominous breath before exhaling a shudder-inducing chill. Regular players, engrossed in their friendly competitions and carefree banter, began to notice something unusual along lane number 13. The lane, once gleaming under bright neon signage, seemed to have its own heartbeat, a slow, deliberate pulse that echoed in time with each roll of the ball. And at the far end of that lane, a lone figure appeared. He was clad in an old-fashioned bowling shirt, crisp white with faded numbers on the back, a stark contrast to the modern decor of the alley. His presence was as unexpected as it was unnerving. No one had ever seen him before, yet his appearance was inexplicably precise, as though he had been waiting there for decades. Some of the players exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if this was some elaborate prank or perhaps a ghostly remnant of a forgotten era. But the look in his eyes, distant yet full of a quiet sorrow, suggested a much darker tale. Curiosity got the better of a small group of friends gathered around lane 12, their eyes drifting toward the spectral figure on lane 13. Jake, the most daring among them, decided to challenge fate. "Watch this," he whispered to his friends, a playful yet defiant grin on his face. With an air of bravado, he approached lane 13 and selected a bright, well-polished bowling ball. The crowd fell silent as he took his stance. The moment Jake released the ball, it began its journey down lane 13, moving with a deliberate, unnatural slowness. Every inch it rolled was accompanied by a palpable tension that made the hairs on the back of everyone's necks stand on end. The usual clamor of the alley was replaced by a pregnant silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. As the ball inched closer to the pins, a distant, hollow laugh echoed through the hall. A laugh that seemed to come not from the speakers or any visible source, but from the very walls of Luna Lanes. The sound was chilling, filled with a mockery of joy and a haunting promise of doom. When the ball finally made contact with the pins, they scattered in a dissonant crash, and the score that flashed on the screen above read 13 unlucky. A collective shudder passed through the onlookers. Jake's bravado had evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed fear as he stared at the score. But the terror didn't end there. From the far end of lane 13, the mysterious figure began to move, a slow, measured stride that seemed to defy the natural laws of physics. His steps were soundless, and as he moved, the dim neon lights flickered around him, casting eerie, elongated shadows that danced along the polished floors. It was as though he was gliding on a current of ancient despair, a remnant of a forgotten past that refused to fade into obscurity. One brave soul, a quiet man named Tom who often came to Luna Lanes to escape the solitude of his small apartment, decided he had to follow. Tom was known among the regulars for his soft-spoken nature and kind smile, but now there was a determined glint in his eyes as he stepped away from the safety of the group. "I need to know who he is," Tom muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to understand." Following the spectral figure down the lane, Tom felt the temperature drop with each step. The air grew dense, heavy with an unspoken warning. The figure paused near a wall of empty lanes that had once buzzed with the laughter of children and the cheers of friends. But tonight, they were eerily deserted. With a final, almost imperceptible nod, the figure turned and stepped behind the wall, vanishing from Tom's sight as if swallowed by the darkness itself. Tom rushed forward, heart pounding so loudly he could almost hear it echo in his ears. He reached the wall only to find nothing but a cold, unyielding barrier where the figure had stood. In its place, a chill lingered, a presence that whispered of secrets too terrible to be forgotten. At that moment, the score on Lane 13 reset, but not to 0. Instead, it remained stubbornly etched in Tom's memory. 13 unlucky. The story of that fateful night spread quickly among the patrons of Luna Lanes. Regulars and newcomers alike began to whisper about the mysterious Midnight Roller, a spectral figure who turned a simple game into a nightmarish performance. Some said he was a ghost, condemned to relive a tragic mistake from the past. Others believed he was an omen, a sign that misfortune was on the horizon. In the weeks that followed, the bowling alley was never quite the same. At midnight, the neon lights would flicker, and the air would grow heavy with anticipation. The regulars started to keep a wary eye on Lane 13, half expecting to see that ghostly figure again. And each time a brave soul dared to roll a ball down that lane, the slow, deliberate journey of the ball and the echo of a hollow laugh brought chills down their spines, as if they were being reminded of a secret too dark to comprehend. Tom, though deeply shaken, couldn't shake the need to understand. He spent countless nights poring over old newspapers and town records, searching for any clue about the identity of the Midnight Roller. What he discovered painted a picture of a man who had lived during a time when bowling alleys were a place of hope and community. A man who had been a celebrated player until a single fateful game that went terribly wrong. In that game, a miscalculation, a single slip, had resulted in a score of 13, a number that had haunted him ever since. The whispers in town claimed that he had been cursed by his own mistake, doomed to roam the lanes forever as an omen of ill fortune. One cold, rainy night several months later, Tom found himself back at Luna Lanes, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't explain. The alley was nearly empty, the usual hum of activity replaced by the soft patter of rain against the glass windows. As the clock neared midnight, Tom sat alone at Lane 13, his eyes fixed on the space where the Midnight Roller was said to appear. The neon lights flickered ominously as the clock struck midnight. Tom's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a resounding echo in the silence. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the tension of 100 unspoken stories swirling in the stagnant air. And then, just as the clock's chime faded into the night, he saw him, the figure in the old-fashioned bowling shirt, standing at the far end of the lane, his presence as undeniable as it was terrifying. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the figure slowly began to walk toward him. Each step was measured, echoing with the ghost of a long-forgotten sorrow. Tom tried to stand, to run, but his limbs were heavy, as if anchored by an unseen force. The figure stopped a few feet away, and in that moment, Tom felt a profound sadness mixed with an overwhelming sense of dread. The spectral man spoke in a voice that seemed to come from deep within the earth. "I carry the burden of 13, the curse of misfortune, and the sorrow of unfulfilled dreams. Every midnight, I am forced to relive my mistake, to remind the living of the price of failure and the inevitability of regret." Tom's eyes widened in disbelief. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper, his voice trembling. The figure's gaze bore into Tom's soul. "I am the Midnight Roller. I am every mistake made in the dark, every fear hidden in the silence of the night. I am the shadow of regret, and I will never be free." At that moment, the distant sound of bowling balls rolling and pins crashing reached Tom's ears, and he realized that the alley was not entirely empty. Others were there, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear as they witnessed the ghostly reenactment. Some tried to escape, but the doors were locked, as if the building itself had been claimed by the curse of the Midnight Roller. In the ensuing moments, chaos erupted. People ran in all directions, their screams mingling with the echoing laughter that had become the harbinger of doom. The neon lights buzzed and flickered in a frenzy, casting bizarre shadows that danced and contorted in the terror-stricken space. Tom, rooted to the spot, watched as the spectral figure turned and walked slowly back toward the wall of empty lanes. With one final glance at the terrified crowd, the Midnight Roller vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a lingering chill and a score that burned into the memory of every onlooker. 13 unlucky. In the aftermath of that night, Luna Lanes became a place of whispered warnings and fearful glances. The legend of the Midnight Roller spread far beyond the town, reaching ears that hungered for tales of terror. People who once laughed at ghost stories now spoke in hushed tones about the cursed alley and the man doomed to eternally replay his tragic mistake. Tom, forever changed by the encounter, dedicated his life to uncovering the mysteries of the past. He delved into records of old bowling tournaments, desperate to find a link between the man in the outdated uniform and the legends of the alley. With each new piece of evidence, the story grew darker and more intricate, weaving a tapestry of loss, regret, and the inescapable grip of fate. As the years passed, every midnight at Luna Lanes became a time of both dread and anticipation. Some patrons, driven by morbid curiosity, would deliberately challenge the curse, rolling their balls down Lane 13 in hopes of catching a glimpse of the Midnight Roller. They did so knowing that with every roll, they risked not just a game, but a brush with a force that transcended the mortal realm, a force that carried with it the heavy weight of regret and the promise of misfortune. And so, the legend of the Midnight Roller lived on, a spectral reminder that even the most innocent of games can hide within them the seeds of terror. The neon lights continued their endless flicker, the pins clattered on the lanes, and every midnight, a hushed whisper passed among the players. Beware the cursed score of 13. For in that number lay a story of despair, a story of a man who would never know peace, and a story that would haunt the dreams of anyone who dared to listen. For those who heard the tale of the Midnight Roller, the fear was palpable, a fear that gripped them in the dead of night, leaving them restless and yearning for the next chapter of the horror that had inexplicably become part of their very lives. And in the silence after midnight, when the bowling alley was shrouded in darkness and the neon lights whispered their final secrets, the legend would awaken once more, ready to remind the world that some curses are eternal, and some stories are meant to be told again and again. Every town has its legends, and in our small town, the most notorious was the tale of the cursed split. It all began with a local bowling champion named Eddie, the Ace Malone. Eddie was known for his flawless technique, his almost supernatural ability to send a bowling ball down the lane and watch it dance through the pins. For years, Eddie reigned supreme at Benny's Lanes, the aging bowling alley where neon lights flickered against walls that held decades of laughter, sweat, and dreams. But as fate would have it, Eddie's glory was destined to end on one fateful night, a comeback game that would cost him everything. It was a humid summer evening when Eddie decided to step back into the limelight. The alley was packed with old friends, rival players, and a few tourists curious about the local hero. The atmosphere was celebratory, with the clatter of pins and rolling balls blending into a comforting symphony. Eddie's comeback game was highly anticipated, a final hurrah to prove that his skill was still intact. As Eddie took his position at Lane 7, the usual cheers and claps died down into an expectant silence. He stared down the polished wooden lane, his eyes reflecting the bright neon glow above. With a confident smile, he released the ball, a perfectly weighted sphere that cut through the air with the promise of victory. The ball rolled true, gathering speed as it advanced. But when it reached the end of the lane, something went horribly wrong. Instead of obliterating the pins, the ball struck them in a way that left two standing, a pair of pins split apart and isolated from one another. For a heartbeat, the alley was silent. Then the laughter started. It was not a kind, friendly laughter, but a hollow, mocking cackle that echoed around the room, sending shivers down the spines of everyone present. The crowd thought it was a joke, a twist of fate in the game, but Eddie's eyes told a different story. In that split second, something dark had shifted. The following days were marked by unsettling events. Eddie's friends began to experience terrifying visions that defied explanation. It started with small things, glimpses of split images in mirrors and windows. At first, they dismissed these reflections as tricks of the light or the result of a tired mind. But soon the visions grew bolder. People would see themselves divided, as if their inner selves were literally split into two parts. One half smiled while the other wept in agony. James, one of Eddie's closest friends and a regular at Benny's Lanes, was the first to report something truly bizarre. While cleaning his apartment one morning, he caught his reflection in an old, dusty mirror. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual. But as he moved, he saw a second image of himself standing just behind, grinning a cold, unnatural smile. James spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The mirror, however, continued to show that split, horrifying reflection, one that whispered his darkest fears in a voice that wasn't his own. Within a week, the strange happenings began to plague everyone connected to the alley. Sarah, a young waitress who worked part-time at the bowling alley's snack bar, started hearing a haunting laughter echoing through the empty corridors of the building after closing time. At first, she thought it was her imagination, fueled by late shifts and too many cups of coffee. But then the laughter became impossible to ignore, a deep, resonant sound that filled the silence of the night. It was as if the sound itself was taunting her, promising that nothing good could ever come from that cursed night. Eddie, who once had a magnetic presence on the lanes, now carried an aura of dread. Desperate to undo what he had inadvertently set in motion, he sought the help of every spiritual medium and mystic he could find. In hushed tones at the back of Benny's Lanes, Eddie described the accident in detail. The way the ball had left the two pins standing, the laughter that had followed, and the inexplicable sense of doom that had enveloped him. He met with Madame Lucille, an elderly medium known for her cryptic warnings and eerie insights. In her dimly lit parlor, surrounded by flickering candles and the smell of incense, Eddie recounted the night's events. Madame Lucille's eyes clouded with sorrow as she listened. "There is a curse, Eddie," she murmured, her voice trembling as if afraid to disturb some ancient spirit. "That split, the one you created, has opened a door. It has invited something from the depths of despair, a dark fate that now seeks to claim those who witness it." Her words did little to ease Eddie's mounting terror. Instead, the curse seemed to grow stronger. Soon, whenever someone got a split in a game at Benny's Lanes, an ominous presence would follow. The scoreboards would flicker and, for a moment, display a chilling message: split doomed. And then inexplicable accidents began to befall the victims. Broken bones without any apparent cause, sudden blackouts, and even a few fatal mishaps, all accompanied by the unmistakable sound of that ghostly split laughter. It wasn't long before the legend of the cursed split began to spread like wildfire. Newcomers to Benny's Lanes would hear hushed warnings. Never attempt the comeback game, never aim for that elusive perfect strike, and above all, beware of the split. Parents would caution their children with trembling voices, urging them not to linger after the game was over. Even the most skeptical among us couldn't help but feel a chill when the subject was broached. On a particularly overcast night, when a dense fog rolled over the town, a group of friends gathered at the alley, daring one another to roll the ball on Lane 7, the infamous lane where it all began. Among them was Mark, a cynical college student who scoffed at ghost stories and superstitions. "It's all nonsense," he declared, a smirk on his face as he challenged the curse. "It's just a game. A split is just a split." Mark's friends exchanged uneasy glances but egged him on. With a defiant laugh, Mark picked up a heavy, worn-out bowling ball and took his stance at Lane 7. The alley fell into an eerie silence as he released the ball. It traveled slowly, almost hesitantly, as if it too sensed the burden of the curse. When it finally reached the pins, it knocked them down in a way that left two standing, just as Eddie had experienced that fateful night. A ripple of cold dread passed through the group as the score flashed on the board. Split doomed. In that instant, the temperature in the alley plummeted, and a soft, mocking laughter echoed off the walls. Mark's bravado dissolved into panic. He stared in disbelief at the two pins, now eerily illuminated by a stray beam of moonlight streaming through a broken window. Behind him, in every reflective surface, a polished counter, a glossy trophy case, even a puddle on the floor, Mark saw his split image. One half frozen in terror, the other grinning with a malicious joy that wasn't his own. The laughter grew louder, filling every corner of the alley, and the lights began to flicker erratically. One by one, his friends fled, leaving Mark alone with the curse he had so foolishly invited. The night stretched on, each minute dragging him deeper into a waking nightmare. The reflections of his split self danced around him, whispering secrets of impending doom, while the ghostly laughter punctuated his mounting despair. In a desperate bid for escape, Mark bolted toward the exit. But the doors refused to budge, as if held shut by an unseen force. The more he struggled, the tighter the grip of the curse became. In that moment, Mark understood the bitter truth. The curse of the split was not just a game. It was a fate, a dark destiny sealed by that one unlucky roll. Over the following weeks, Benny's Lanes was never the same. The once cheerful sounds of laughter and clattering pins were replaced by an omnipresent tension, a constant reminder of the curse that lurked in every shadow. People began to avoid Lane 7, and whispers of the cursed split grew louder with every retelling of the story. Every time someone dared to roll a ball on that lane, the darkness stirred, and the curse claimed another victim, binding them to a torment that seemed both inexorable and eternal. Eddie Malone, once a celebrated champion, became a recluse, haunted by memories of that cursed comeback game. He spent countless nights wandering the empty halls of Benny's Lanes, searching for a way to break the curse that had ruined his life. But every attempt, every prayer to the supernatural forces that governed his fate, only seemed to intensify the curse's grip. The more he tried to fight it, the deeper he sank into the relentless cycle of misfortune and despair. Local lore had it that the curse of the split was a relic of a deeper, darker power, a power that thrived on the imperfections of human ambition. That fateful game had been the catalyst, a moment when the fabric between the ordinary and the supernatural had been torn. And now, every split on the lane was like a chime of an ancient bell, echoing the eternal lament of a broken soul. Today, as you walk by Benny's Lanes on a cold, moonless night, you might still hear the distant sound of ghostly laughter, or catch a glimpse of a split reflection in a darkened window. And if you dare to step inside and pick up a bowling ball, remember this. Sometimes the simplest pleasures hide the darkest secrets. For in that game, where pins fall and legends are born, a cursed fate awaits those who disturb the balance between triumph and tragedy, a fate that may forever split your soul in two. The curse of the split is a reminder that behind every perfect strike lies a shadow of imperfection, and every split carries within it the weight of a legacy best left undisturbed. So the next time you hear the rumble of a bowling ball, pause and listen carefully. You might just hear the whispers of those who never left the alley, a chilling chorus of regret, despair, and the promise that the curse is far from over. Each of these tales, passed down through hushed conversations and trembling recollections, reminds us that sometimes the simplest pleasures, like a night of bowling, can hide the darkest secrets. So the next time you hear the rumble of a bowling ball, pause for a moment and listen for the whispers of those who never left the alley.